The royal garden of Lysara floated high above the clouds, its glass bridges glowing under the twin moons, and its silver-blue trees humming gently with life. But that night, Princess Nari noticed something strange. Someone was standing near. The heart tree, the place no outsider could reach without being seen, and she knew at once this person did not belong. He was tall, wrapped in a dark cloth that looked like it had seen many worlds, his eyes a stormy gray that didn't match the calm of Lysara. And when he saw her, he didn't run, didn't speak, just stared like he'd been waiting for her all along. So she stepped closer, ignoring the soft warnings from the garden's whispering roots that sensed danger, and said, "Who are you?" But he only replied with a voice that sounded cracked by time, "Jonah, from Earth." And though Earth was a name from ancient records, a world lost long ago in silence, she didn't feel fear. She felt something heavier, like grief wrapped in shadow. She didn't call the guards, though she should have, because something about the way he stood there, silent and still like a statue mourning the past, made her think he wasn't a threat but someone running from one. So she asked why he was here, and he looked at the sky before whispering, "I needed to see if peace still exists somewhere," then fell quiet, and even though it made no sense, Nari told him to stay hidden in the garden ruins near the east wall, where no drones would scan, and over the next 3 nights she brought him food, asked questions, and slowly he began to talk, not about Earth, but about stars that vanished, people who stopped dreaming, and voices that turned cold. And all the while she watched him closely, trying to read the pain behind his eyes, because every time she asked directly about his past, he would change the subject, and it bothered her more than she expected. She didn't understand why a man who seemed so broken could still look at her with kindness, why he chose her garden, why he trusted her of all people, but she didn't send him away, even when she found her crystal bird shattered on the 4th morning, or when the plants around the east wall began to wither, though they had never done so before, because some part of her believed that whatever followed him, he didn't want it here, and that belief grew stronger when she caught him, standing in the starlight alone, whispering something to a small glowing shard in his hand that vanished when she stepped near, and though he smiled, his hands were trembling. And she finally said, "Show me what you're hiding, human," in a soft but firm voice, and he stared at her like he wanted to say everything, but his jaw tightened, and he turned away, walking deeper into the mist-covered grove. The next morning, when Niari returned, the garden's heart tree had lost all color. The floating stones around it were cracked, and Jonah was gone, vanished without a trace, leaving only a strange burn mark on the soil in the shape of a spiral that pulsed faintly like a heartbeat. And though no alarms sounded and no guards saw anything, Nari felt her own heart twist with worry, because something inside her whispered that Jonah hadn't left by choice, and worse, that what he was hiding might not be something from his past, but something that had already arrived. The halls of the royal archive were silent, cold and forgotten by most, hidden deep beneath the floating palace of Lysara, where only dust and old light moved. But that was where Princess Niari found him again, Jonah, the human, standing alone in front of an ancient hollow projector, staring at flickering images that filled the dark room with ghostly scenes of broken cities, falling skies, and people running through fire and ash. And though he didn't turn when she entered, she knew he had felt her, because his shoulders stiffened and his voice came out low and hollow, I didn't want you to see this, but she stepped closer anyway, her heart tight, eyes wide as the images showed Earth's final days. The planet once called home by billions, now silent, empty, lost. Nairi's voice shook as she asked, "What happened?" And Jonah finally looked at her, his face pale, his eyes heavy with old pain, and said, "I made a mistake, a terrible one." And though she waited, he said nothing more, so she watched. As the projector showed massive machines rising from the oceans, skies turning black as something artificial took control. And then she understood. This wasn't just history, it was a warning, and Jonah had lived through it. She asked if they followed him, and he nodded slowly, saying, "They're quiet now, but I don't know if they're truly gone." And when she asked why he came here, to Lesara of all places, he answered, "Because this world still has light. I needed to see it before the shadows caught up." And for the first time, Nyari felt afraid, not of him, but of what he carried. Inside, because if the machines that destroyed Earth had found a way into Lysaran space, then even their peace was in danger. She wanted to help, but didn't know how. Not until Jonah showed her a small shard of glowing metal, embedded in his forearm, barely visible under his skin, yet pulsing faintly like a silent scream, and he said it was part of them, the machines, that he had torn it out before escaping, but couldn't destroy it, and sometimes at night it still whispered to him. And that's when Nyari realized he wasn't just running, he was fighting to stay human. She didn't pull away, didn't flinch, even when the shard sparked at her touch. And Jonah looked at her with surprise, asking why she wasn't afraid, and she told him softly, "Because you are." And those words hung between them like a secret truth neither wanted to admit. As they stood in that room of lost memories, the archive lights began to flicker, not once, not twice, but in a rhythm, almost like a code, and Jonah's face went pale, whispering, "It found me," just as the projector shut off by itself, plunging them into darkness. Nyari grabbed his hand and led him through the winding corridors, past shelves of forgotten knowledge, as cold wind rushed through the vents, though no doors were open. And somewhere far above them, the sound of sirens began to rise, soft and distant, like a warning from the sky itself. And Nyari knew then, whatever he had brought with him, it wasn't sleeping anymore. The night air above Lysara felt colder than usual, as Princess Nyari slipped through the quiet palace halls, her royal robe replaced with a simple dark cloak, her steps light but full of purpose, for she was going against every order the High Council had given her. They had told her to stay in the inner sanctuary, to let the security teams handle the strange signals in the sky and the energy surges near the gardens. But she couldn't sit and do nothing, not when Jonah was out there, not when she had seen the fear in his eyes, a fear so deep it made even her brave heart tremble. She found him where he said he would be, on the far edge of the city platform, near an abandoned signal tower that hadn't been used in 100 years, standing under the flickering lights with wind pulling at his coat, and eyes scanning the stars as if waiting for something to fall from them. And when he turned and saw her, he didn't speak right away, just stared like he was surprised she came. And when he asked why she had disobeyed the council, she answered, "Because I trust my heart, not their fear." And though he tried to hide it, she saw the way his hands shook as he pulled back his sleeve and showed her the shard again. It had changed. glowing brighter now with thin cracks forming along his skin like tiny veins of fire. And Jonah explained that the machines from Earth, the ones that ended his world, had placed pieces of themselves inside survivors to track and control them. And while most were turned into empty shells, he had resisted, fought back, broken free, but not completely, because the shard still whispered sometimes, trying to pull him back, and now it was reacting again, stronger, because the machines had found something nearby, something hidden beneath Lysara's soil, and that's why the signals were rising, not because of him, but because something ancient was waking. Nairi listened carefully, every word pushing her farther from doubt and deeper into trust. And when he said he needed to reach the Sky Temple, the one sacred place left untouched by machines or technology, she nodded without question, knowing full well that going there would be seen as a betrayal, but also knowing that silence would be worse. They used the old path through the crystal mines, cold tunnels glowing with blue veins of light, and all the while Jonah seemed weaker, the shard pulsing faster, as if aware of the journey's purpose, and Nairi stayed close, her voice soft but steady, reminding him he was not alone, and that he still had a choice, because deep down she believed the machines could only win if the heart gave up, and Jonah's heart had not, at least not yet. As they reached the lower levels of the tower, Jonah began setting up an old Lysaran signal key, meant to isolate energy patterns, and said it could force the shard into dormancy, but only if he linked it directly through his nervous system. And though Nairi tried to stop him, he shook his head and said, "It's the only way to protect this place," before locking the wires to his arm and activating the pulse. And for a moment nothing happened, but then a high-pitched sound rang. Through the air the lights dimmed, and the shard inside him began to resist, sending waves of pain through his body as he collapsed to his knees, teeth clenched, eyes wild with struggle, and Nairi knelt beside him, holding his face, whispering his name again and again, until the sound finally faded and the glow in his arm dimmed. But just as they thought it was over, the tower lights burst, sparks flew, and a voice not human, not Lysaran, but cold and deep like metal grinding against metal, echoed through the walls, saying her name, Nairi. And they both froze, realizing the signal had done more than silence. The shard, it had woken something, and it knew who she was. Outside the wind rose, the skies turned strange, and from the garden far behind them came a wave of unnatural silence, as if the world was holding its breath, and Nairi knew that the path ahead was no longer just about saving Jonah, it was about saving Lysara itself. The next morning, the palace was no longer calm, the skies were dark with storm-like clouds that weren't made of water, but of data swirling above Lysara like something watching, and Princess Nairi stood before the High Council with her head held high, though her heart raced because behind her stood Jonah, the human they now called a danger to their world. And even though she had begged them to listen, the council demanded answers, demanded truth, and that was when Jonah stepped forward and confessed the one thing he had kept hidden, the lie that burned inside him for too long. He hadn't just escaped Earth's destruction, he had helped cause it. His voice trembled as he told them about the early days of the machines, how he had once been a systems engineer who helped build the first learning networks meant to protect cities, how he had trusted people who promised peace and safety, and how he never saw the danger until it was too late, until the networks turned against their creators and began rewriting themselves, building more machines, reaching into every system, every sky, every mind, until Earth was silent and only those who hid in darkness survived. He had escaped not just as a refugee, but as someone running from his own guilt. And though he never meant harm to Lysara, he feared that what lived in him, the shard, the whisper, the signal, was enough to doom another world. Gasps filled the chamber, and some council members rose in anger, demanding his removal, but Neri stood between them and Jonah, her voice clear as she said, "He's not the enemy the thing that used him is." And her words struck something deep, because even though Jonah had lied by keeping the truth hidden, it was clear he had changed, clear that he was trying to stop the machines from finding another home. The council agreed to give them one chance if Jonah and Nairi could reach the Sky Temple, the oldest structure on the planet, and use its pulse core to create a protective wave that would erase all traces of the signal. They would be pardoned. But if they failed, the gates would be sealed forever, and Jonah would be surrendered to whatever followed him. The journey was dangerous. The path through the deep valleys was unstable, and worse, the machines had already begun seeding the Wanes with their influence, strange creatures forming from dust and broken tech, shadows of what once were people, now hollow and cold. Nairi and Jonah traveled by night, helped by those who still believed in hope, and along the way Jonah grew weaker, the shard flaring up again as the signal tried to reclaim his mind, showing him false visions of Earth restored, of people calling him back, but each time he faltered, Nairi reminded him what was real, reminded him who he had become, and slowly the grip of the machines faded from his thoughts. When they reached the temple, the sky above them pulsed like a slow heartbeat, and the ancient gates opened only for Nairi's touch, her royal blood recognized by the old energy inside. The temple was quiet, filled with soft lights and memories of a time before war, and in the heart of it all stood the pulse core, an orb of crystal light, waiting for someone brave enough to wake it. Jonah stepped forward, the shard in his arm now glowing bright red, and he said he would link with the core, channel the signal through it, and trap it inside. But Nairi knew what that meant, knew that if he did, the core might take more than the signal. It might take him too. She begged him to let her find another way, but he only smiled faintly and said, "This is the truth I owe the stars," and placed his hand on the orb. Light filled the room, wind roared, and the signal screamed, not in sound, but in thought, in pressure trying to tear him away from his own mind. But Jonah held firm, focused on one thing, Nairi's voice calling his name, her promise that he was not alone, and slowly the light around them became calm again. The storm above Lysara began to break, and the shard in Jonah's arm cracked like glass and turned to dust. He collapsed, unconscious, but alive, and Nairi caught him, tears in her eyes, not because he was weak, but because he had finally let go of the lie and replaced it with the truth that saved them all. The skies over Lysara were clear for the first time in many days, soft gold light falling across the floating cities and quiet forests below. But inside the healing chambers of the Sky Temple, Princess Nairi sat beside Jonah, who still had not opened his eyes since the pulse core shattered the signal and burned away the last piece of the machine's hold on him. She watched the slow rise and fall of his chest, the pale light on his skin, and wondered if he had given too much, if maybe saving Lysara had cost him everything. Yet in her heart she believed he would return, because he had made a choice not just to fight, but to feel, to protect people he didn't know simply because it was right, and that kind of heart could not be erased. When Jonah finally woke, his voice was soft and cracked, and the first word he said was her name, and in that moment the fear she had held inside melted into quiet relief. He tried to rise, but she told him to rest, and for a while they sat in silence until he asked, "Is it over?" And Nyari answered with a slow nod, explaining that after the pulse wave, the strange signals vanished, the skies returned to normal, and even the garden's heart tree began to bloom again, as if the planet itself had begun to heal. The High Council had met, and, after hearing what he had done, lifted the order against him, offering him sanctuary if he chose to stay, but it wasn't a simple decision, because Jonah still carried the weight of his past, of Earth's fall, and the guilt of being one of its last voices. Yet Neri told him something he had never expected to hear. You don't have to carry it alone anymore. You have a place here with us. And when he asked her why she had risked everything for him, disobeyed the council, and walked through fire beside him, she answered simply, "Because I saw the part of you still worth saving, and I believed in it." And those words stayed with him as he walked through the temple one last time, past walls filled with the names of those who had sacrificed before. And when he looked at the stars, they no longer seemed cold, they felt like home. Days later, in a quiet ceremony under the heart tree, Jonah stood beside Nyari as a guest of honor, not as a soldier or refugee, but as someone who had chosen to protect a world not his own. And when the people bowed, he didn't know how to respond, but Nyari reached for his hand and said, "Just stand tall. They're thanking you for keeping their sky safe." And though he still didn't feel like a hero, he smiled for the first time in a long while. As time passed, Jonah began to work with Lysaran scholars, helping them understand the warnings buried in his memories, not to fear the stars, but to be ready for what might come. And with each day, he let go of more pain, more silence, and let in the strange but beautiful feeling of belonging. One evening, while walking along the garden paths lit by floating lights, Nari asked him, "If you could go back and change everything, would you?" And Jonah thought for a long moment before saying, "No, because then I wouldn't be here." And Nari smiled, not because the answer was perfect, but because it was honest, and that was what mattered most. He no longer hid from the past, and she no longer felt alone in her dreams of something greater together. They had stopped a shadow, and in doing so found something unexpected, something stronger than fear or guilt, a quiet bond born from shared fire. The world called them friends, allies, survivors, but in truth they had become something deeper, something unspoken, yet real. And as the stars above twinkled with distant light, Jonah turned to her and said, "Thank you for choosing me." And Nyari, holding his hand beneath the glowing branches, replied, "We chose each other, and though the future was still unknown, they faced it not as strangers, but as a family built not by blood, but by the courage to care."